Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today, we are continuing our series on the journals of Ralph Waldo Emerson. We are picking up the journals in June 30th, 1826. Emerson is 23 years old, and this supposedly is a letter from Emerson to, it says Miss Emerson. However, there's a question mark by the name Miss Emerson, so I suppose it is in doubt for some reason. With that said, I'll go ahead and start with that letter. Cambridge, June 30th, 1826. In all the vagaries I have troubled you with, not much has been said of poetry, though a subject near to us both. I should be glad to see your thoughts on its general nature and value. Does the continuation of your own speculations show its fairy web to be superficial, or wrought into the grain of man? Is it left behind as we advance, or is it more perfect in the archangel than in the child? And for the professors of the art, can they not err by excess of relish for the same? It would seem that the genuine bard must be one in whom the extremes of human genius meet, that his judgment must be exact and level with life, as his imagination is discursive and incalculable. It would seem as if abundant erudition, foreign travel, and gymnastics exercises must be annexed to his awful imagination and fervent piety to finish Milton. That the boisterous childhood, careless of criticism and poetry, the association of vulgar and unclean companions, were necessary to balance the towering spirit of Shakespeare, and that Mr. Wordsworth has failed of pleasing by being too much a poet. A man may propose a course of exercises designed to strengthen his arm with such indiscreet zeal as to paralyze it. A boy enamored of the beauty of a butterfly chases and clutches it with such eagerness that he finds his hands full of dirt and blood. I can't read this poet's mystic and unmeaning verses without feeling that if he had cultivated poetry less and learning and society more, he would have gained more favor at the hands of the muses, who must be courted, not taken by violence. 'Tis sufficient proof of a man's aberration to know that he is writing verses on a theory, that he has agreed with 2 or 3 antics more to bring the public over to a new taste in poetry. It would seem there was some kindred between this new philosophy of poetry and the undisciplined enterprises of intellect in the Middle Age. The geniuses of that era, all on fire with that curiosity which is in every age inextinguishable, to break the marble silence of nature and open some intercourse between man and that divinity with which it seems instinct, struggle to grasp the principles of things, to extort from the spheres and the firmament some intimations of the present or some commentary on the past. They were impatient of their straitened dominion over nature, and were eager to explore the secrets of her own laboratory, that they might refine clay and iron into gold, might lengthen life and deduce formulas for the solution of all those mysteries that besiege the human adventurer. Not otherwise this modern poet, by natural humor, an ardent lover of all the enchantments of wood and river, and seduced by an overweening confidence in the force of his own genius, has discarded that modesty under whose influence all his great precursors have resorted to external nature sparingly for illustration and ornament, and have forborne to tamper with the secret and metaphysical nature of what they borrowed. He has been foolishly inquisitive about the essence and body of what pleased him, of what all sensible men feel to be in its nature evanescent. He can't be satisfied with feeling the general beauty of a moonlight evening or of a rose. He would pick them to pieces and pounce on them, the pleasurable element he is sure in them, like the little boy who cut open his drum to see what made the noise. The worthy gentleman gloats over a bulrush, moralizes on the irregularity of one of its fibers, and suspects a connection between an excrescence of the plant and its own immortality. Is it not much more comfortable to that golden middle line in which all that is good and wise of life lies, to let what heaven made small and casual remain the objects of a notice small and casual, and husband our admiration for images of grandeur in matter or in mind? But I should not worry myself with abusing Mr. Wordsworth, not even for his serene egotism, whereby he seems at every turn thunderstruck to see what a prodigious height human genius has headed up in him, but that he has occasionally written lines which I think truly noble. He would be unworthy your notice, but that now and then comes from him a flash of divine light, and makes you uneasy that he should be such an earthen vessel. He has nobly embodied a sentiment which I know not why has always seemed congenial to humanity, that the soul has come to us from a pre-existence in God, that we have a property in the past which we do not ourselves recognize, and a title to the future for which we should be a little thankful. Wait a little, says this venerable faith, and this feverish being for which you are so anxious will be whelmed in a vaster being to which it is only subsidiary. But let the glory and virtue of other worlds be as they may, in parting with our identity, we part with happiness. Every age, as it augments the number of successful experiments of genius, whilst it should seem to furnish that large induction from whence we can ascertain the true extent and nature of poetry, has rather appeared to carry its title into new empires, and annex an import yet more vague and universal to the world. What is poetry? It is philosophy, it is humor, it is a chime of 2 or 3 syllables, it is a relation of thought to things or of language to thought. It converses with all science and all imagination, with all accidents and objects, from the grandest that are accessible to the senses, and grander than those to the coarsest parts of life. And I would go to the farthest verge of the green earth to learn what it was or was not. If the spirit of him who paced the academy, and had his virtue in his soul, though he feigned to disparage it in his philosophy, or the laurelled lovers of the British Muse, harp in hand, sit on your misty mount, or soothe their majesties by the margin of your legs, conjure them, I beseech you, to announce this secret that the wit of humanity has been so long in vain toiling to unriddle. It shall be reverently received and cautiously dispensed, and shall add a rich item to the scanty stock of truth of which your friend is the humble master. Cambridge, July 28th, 1826. There is but one meaning can be put upon the term happiness consistent with what our experience has shown. It consists in reliefs, not in enjoyments. And unhappiness is an uneasiness, a useful uneasiness in the body or mind, prompting to the attainment of some good agreeable to its nature. That is to say, all unhappiness tends to happiness. A letter to Miss Emerson, the 1st of August, 1826. 'Tis a droll life, and the only humor proper to it seems quiet astonishment. Others laugh, weep, sell, or proselyte. I admire. There are, I take it, in each man's history, insignificant passages which he feels to him not to be insignificant, little coincidences and little things which touch all the springs of wonder and startle the sleeper conscience in the deepest cell of his repose. The mind, with all her faculties rushing out in alarm, suspicious of a presence which it greatly behooves her to respect, touched not more with awe than with curiosity, if perhaps some secret revelation is not about to be vouchsafed, or doubtful if some moral epoch is not just now fulfilled in its history, and in the tocsin just now struck that severs and tolls out an irreparable past. These are not the stale reasons by which we can enforce the burdensome doctrine of deity on the world, but make often, I apprehend, the body of evidence on which private conviction is built. In solitude and in silence, memory visits her inmost chambers to produce these treasured tokens of connection and immortality. Much of what is subtle and mysterious in our intervals of mentality is more flattering and more favored than the ordinary acquisitions in the general progress of the soul, And but what congratulation ought to be heard in the earth from the theist and patriot, when God, in these eminent instances of these our latter days, departs from the ancient inviolable sternness of an unrespecting providence, to harmonize the order of nature with the moral exigencies of humanity. Arise from the dust, put on thy beautiful clothing, O thou that wast despised for depravity, want, and presumption. Human nature will go daft in our time, like the Grecian father who embraced 2 Olympian victors in one day. Cambridge, August 3rd, 1826. Yesterday I attended the funeral solemnities in Faneuil Hall in honor of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. The oration of Mr. Webster was worthy of his fame, and what is much more, was worthy of the august occasion. Never, I think, were the awful charms of person, manners, and voice outdone. For though in the beginning unpromising, and in other parts imperfect, in what was truly grand he fully realized the boldest conception of eloquence. August 12th, to his brother Edward Bliss Emerson, who was then traveling in Europe for his health. Eyes so rich will atone for many petty uneasinesses, for hands that are poor, and a little while, for hopes deferred, and affections fasting for their food. In the long run, in the great existence, they will vindicate their paramount importance, and hold at cheap rate the disappointment or even blight of a particular affection. For the wealth of the eye passes into the mind, elevating its tone, nourishing its strength, enlarging its proportions. And this godlike inhabitant is always a favorite, and can create for itself new attachments whensoever and where it chooses. Blood is a dear tie, and old love is not easily forgotten, but this sort of feeling is but a rag of wretched humanity, low itself, and dwelling in low places, and striving to link its necessities to lofty sentiment. But the soul sternly assures us that there are affinities dearer and truer, that these are perishing, but those eternal. Emerson writes on quittal. Excessive love of order denominated quittal. Apparent why it should be the mark of a weak mind, because proximity of time and place being the simplest of associations, a violation of it in a mind where higher relations do not enter must produce painful confusion. Emerson writes on 2 sorts of people. 1. Who find themselves in life and content themselves with looking at the great show they find around them, and 2. Who like the game and enter into it with spirit. September 10th, 1826. The days blow me onward into the deserts of eternity. I live a few strong moments in the course, perhaps, of each day. I observe a little the ways of man, and in them accumulated the ways of God. I act a little. I shape my fortunes, as it seems to me, not at all. For in all my life I obey a strong necessity, and all that sacrifice of time and inclination which certain of my fond friends regard as virtue, I see and confess to be only a passive deference to the course of events. For in reference to those passages of my life which please their moral sense, I could not have done otherwise without doing violence to my own or my neighbor's feelings. There was in those instances in the very likely supposition that I had disliked to play the martyr, no nook, no pretense such as commonly falls to other people, under cover of which I might plausibly decline the assured alternative of inconvenience and loss. It is melancholy to suffer on account of others without any appeal to our own self-devotion as the cause. It is low and ridiculous to be the football of vulgar circumstances, and never by force of character to have surmounted them. And yet, inasmuch as the course of events in the world appears to consent to virtue, these regretted evils may be ennobled by being a portion of the sublime necessity which links all agents and events together under an omnipotent jurisdiction. Be the theories as they may, it suits my humor to sit and speculate, a civil philosopher, mild and composed in the presence of little and of majestic minds, without contempt of reptiles, and, as the Stoics say, without being afraid of gods. Emerson speaks on growth of the mind. Our American press does not often issue such productions as Sampson Reed's Observations on the Growth of the Mind, a book of such a character as I am conscious betrays some pretension even to praise. It has to my mind the aspect of a revelation, such is the wealth and such is the novelty of the truth unfolded in it. It is remarkable for the unity into which it has resolved the various powers, feelings, and vocations of men, suggesting to the mind that harmony, which it has always a propensity to seek, of action and design in the order of providence in the world. September 23rd. Health, action, happiness, how they ebb from me. Poor Sisyphus saw his stone stop once, at least, when Orpheus chanted, I must roll mine up and up and up, how high a hill. But hark, I can hear on the eastern wind almost the harp of my coming Orpheus. He sets his sail and flees over the grim flood. Breathe soft the winds and shine warmly on him, the autumnal sun. It may be a contrary destiny will be too strong on me for the help of his hand, but speed his bark, for his heart is noble and his hand is strong, and the good of others is given into his hand. It would give me very great pleasure to be well. It is mournful, the expectation of ceasing to be an object of hope, that we may become objects of compassion, and then go gloomily to nothing in the eye of this world, before we have had one opportunity of turning to the sun what we know is our best side. But there have existed on earth noble thoughts and souls that gave them free entertainment, which sentiments were designed as counterpoises to these very sorrows and consolation to worse distresses. What is Stoicism? What is Christianity? They are for nothing, that is to say, the human mind at its best estate and the divine mind in its communication with the human are for nothing, if they cannot set the soul on an equilibrium when it leans to the earth under the pressure of calamity. I bless God there is virtue in them. The warlike soul that has put on this armor has come off conqueror. Little vexations that eat into the hearts of meaner men were to them that were of the household of this faith dust and smoke. They met with the undaunted eye and even temper. They felt the slow wasting of disease which seems to consume the powers of resistance whilst it augments the force of the attack. The fires that hope had kindled up in the firmament within were seen to wane in their light, and star by star were slowly extinguished. But there was that in them of robust virtue that derived a blameless triumph from contrasting the health of the soul with the decay of its house, the eternity of the universe with the transition of its parts, the grandeur of the ends themselves were pursuing with the puny weakness of the instruments, the immortal life, the great, the immeasurable, the overwhelming progression of the mind, with the little passing cloud of tears, decline, and death with which it was afflicted on earth. These things they thought on and were comforted. These were the good angels that gathered before them on the holy mount of their hope, and beckoned them to walk boldly forward in the valleys of life, proof to temptation and not afraid of trial, overlooking the crosses and accidents of the way, for their bright and burning eye was fixed steadfastly on the future. Thus much must serve me for a consolatory soliloquy now, or from a sermon by and by, if I prosper better than I at this present apprehend. These that have been said are the stated, the official consolations. There is another key on which vulgar understandings are sometimes to better purpose addressed. Up, up, faint heart, never won fair lady. No, there's a necessity in fate, why still the brave, bold man is fortunate. Die? What should you die for? Maladies? What maladies? Dost not know that nature has her course as well as disease? That nature has not only helps and facilities for all beneficial operations, but fangs and weapons for her enemies also? Die? Pale face, lily liver, go about your business, and when it comes to the point, then die like a gentleman. Christianity, in its purified and primitive state, makes one with the moral code. They cast mutual light and honor on each other. The doctrine of immortality, the grand revelation of Christianity, illuminates and ennobles the existence of man. This solves the question concerning the existence of evil. For if man is immortal, this world is his place of discipline, and the value of pain is then disclosed. The most absurd and frivolous superstitions have been defended as the most precious doctrines which Jesus Christ came into the world to teach. These insane tenets have been sanctioned by councils and sealed by the blood of martyrs. An age went by, a revolution in men's minds took place, and these famous dogmas are pleasantly quoted to amuse an idle hour, and speedily are forgotten. And now, it may be, another set of opinions is taught in councils and illustrated in pulpits. But what security is there that these are more genuine than those that went before, or that another age may not treat them with the same irreverence? And in this shifting spectacle is not a doubt thrown upon the gospel itself, which is thus represented to different ages in such contradictory lights? Poison, poison, poison. The poison of vanity, the poison of fear, the poison of testimony. Poison expels poison, and vices are expelled by pride. Quote, the enigma of ourselves swallows up, like the Sphinx, thousands of systems which pretend to the glory of having guessed its meaning. End quote. Madame de Stael. Letter from Ralph Waldo Emerson to Miss Emerson, September 28, 1826. Hume, all grimace apart, you honor as a genuine scholar, as an exact and powerful philosopher, without a single word of dullness, and with this single qualification of praise, that because of the novelty of the ground he had taken, he was seduced from the grand view of human nature which he ought to have taken, into a consideration, too partial and minute, of the defective nature of our reasoning, and this, entering into all his habits of thinking, chilled and belittled, compared with a religious wisdom, all his philosophy. In the history of metaphysics and ethics, however, the advantage is of course great. The experiment might not have been tried under better auspices, and every experiment must once be made. Of his friend Gibbon, I think there can be but one idea among people of good feeling and sense. He was a sort of Alcibiades, whom all the instructions of Socrates might adorn, but could not purify. Then Shakespeare and Burke. The old poet is crushed under his laurels, and you would hardly withdraw a leaf but for the indecency of the old stage. It was queer, a sort of representation of humanity, that the truest of all bards should be permitted thus to mix the highest and vilest. Heroism, virtue, devotion thrown into these brothel associations, but the words of Brutus and Julius Caesar will search out a sympathy in the purest heart that ever turned a severe eye on the spotted web of human intellect. But why maul the old idol? We think alike of him. Then we can have no quarrel about Burke and improved Cicero, improved precisely in proportion of the advanced age. As to what is met from our American press, I can't but think the glowing epithets that come down from the mountains are a full echo of the applause of the valleys. I think of our orators. For one's reputation's sake, 'tis always well to stick in a word to qualify admiration, and you should have heard us tax in Everett the want of an abounding, delicate philosophy not at all compensated by the dazzle of the imagery. Moreover, there is in many minds a certain dullness to perceive God, not so quick a habit of detecting and confederating final causes, whence he is inferred. But for diligence, rectitude, fancy, and sense, we reckon Edward Everett chief among 10,000. Next, it seems I am cold, and when shall I kindle? I was born cold. My bodily habit is cold. I shiver in and out. Don't heat to the good purpose called enthusiasm a quarter so thick and kindly as my neighbors. Yet so depraved is self-conceit that I sometimes imagine this very seed of wrath to be one of my gifts, though not graces. Quote, poor mortals do themselves beguile. End quote. Journal entry in October. But what, in the name of all the fairies, is the reason you don't like Samson Reed? What swart star has looked sparely on him? Can anything be more greatly, more wisely writ? Has any modern hand touched the harp of great nature so rarely? Has any looked so shrewdly into the subtle and concealed connection of man and nature, of earth and heaven? Has any, in short, produced such curiosity to see the farther progress, the remoter results of the caste of intellect to which he belongs? I speak for myself and not for another. I believe he must have admirers, but I have not seen any. The Sabbath after it came out, Dr. Channing delivered a discourse obviously founded upon it. And as to his sect, you know they exult in the independent testimony of poor Wordsworth to the same truths which they get from Swedenborg. Lo, what confirmations to what I said about sentiment ruling the roast in these our matchless times! What holiday the easy satirist might hold in pleasant observance of the fickle world, but for the iron fate that levels the destiny of each with the destiny of all, and inflicts the observer with the same evil and folly which he analyzes. There is an editorial annotation here which I will read. On October 10th, the young divinity student, having, though irregularly, studied what seemed to the authorities enough to make such action on their part safe, had been, quote, approbated to preach, quote, by the Middlesex Association of Ministers. He had, even a month or two before this, preached his first sermon in his Uncle Ripley's pulpit in Waltham, and after his approbation preached in his father's, the First Church in Boston. Emerson speaks on House of Have and House of Want. See the 68th number of the Quarterly Review for some prodigiously fine remarks at the close of the geological article. Rumbold's opinion, who died on the Rye House plot, quoted by Jefferson, men saddled and bridled for others, booted and spurred, etc. Burnet. Emerson speaks on disproportion. All vice is built on the apparent disproportion there is between the temptation to do wrong and the motive to do right. The contest that exists between these opposite influences is like no other strife in nature. It is no combat between beings of the same blood, of equal might, of the like nature between sword and sword, or wit and wit. Emerson speaks on immortality. That fate and metaphysical aid do deem that I shall be great or small is of little moment, so that the great hope of spirits militant be sure. For who can doubt but that in ages of intercourse that impend with spirit of every degree of grandeur, be it of thought or of virtue, he can fail to find his own level, or fear to be robbed of his just fame? But shake down this blessed doctrine of the resurrection towards which the wise and good, the countless generations of men as they scanned in their little day the impending future, have darted their desiring eyes, to which every conclusion of the intellectual power and every effort of the moral power have pointed, from the first glimmering of human history, and you have done more ruin than if you had shaken down the stars from their courses. And after this downfall, all things here below, or there above, are so insignificant to us, who are to be connected with them but a moment, that fame which we nickname immortality is but the shadow of a shade. Emerson speaks on history. 'Tis not always easy to separate what principles are robust and stable, what in humanity is immovably moored, from what is tossed upon the waves of time. Few things need more philosophy than the study of history, for it is not easy or safe to look long on these turning wheels, lest we grow giddy. The best good that is reaped is the glorious congregation of final causes, that is marshalled as this muse descends from age to age, the indisputable tribute they bring of obedience and honor to deity. The examination of a single idea with the eye of exact philosophy leads to atheism and to universal doubt, is susceptible of all the criticism which Mr. Hume assailed the sources of knowledge, but many ideas confederated compel men to believe. I need observe that 'tis no result of accumulated inquiry that has brought into doubt the faithfulness of the senses. For, in Plato's Phaedon, Socrates mentions that the poets sing that, quote, "We neither see nor hear truly," end quote, but what was moonshine then is philosophy now. I have heard Shakespeare's "blow winds and crack your cheeks," and the rest accused of false taste and bombast. I do not find this fault, and though I might not allow it in another, even in this mad king, yet I am not offended by this passage in Lear. For as the Romans were so idolatrous of Cato's virtue, that when he had drunk wine they would rather believe that intemperance was virtue than that Cato was guilty of a vice, so I am afraid to circumscribe within rhetorical rules the circuits of such a towering and majestic mind, and a taste the most exquisite that God ever informed among men. Quote, "We seem to recognize a truth the first time we hear it," end quote. Fontenelle. Cambridge, November 1826. I would write something worthily on the most affecting of topics, upon the personal character and influence upon the death of Jesus Christ, a being whose nature has divided the opinions of men more than did ever any question, who was so great as to leave foundation for the idea that he was a portion of the deity, and in the opinions least reverent, that he was first of men. A being who would be called renowned, did not fame and what men call glory sink before his majesty into things offensive and ridiculous. A human being whose influence on the fortunes of human society, taking out of account all supernatural influence, has been far the most powerful foreign influence that ever acted thereon. A being whose character was so pure and whose death was so sublime as, if no consequences had followed, would for himself have attracted the greatest admiration. I find in Burke almost the same thought I had entertained as an original remark 3 years ago, that nothing but the moral quality of actions can penetrate through vast intervals of time. Quote, "The translator," end quote, says Butler, quote, "is a small factor that imports books of the growth of one language into another, but it seldom turns to account for the commodity of perishable, and the finer it is, the worse it endures transportation, as the most delicate of Indian fruits are by no art to be brought over." End quote. Here follows a poem. The spirits of the wise sit on the clouds, and mock the ambition of man. For his breath is vapor, his beauty the color of a cloud, and his body and soul are parted by a sun, a storm, or the feeble fork of a poor woman. And who shall tell his household, whither the soul of the dead man is gone? Is it gone to live in torture, enduring a dread resurrection into pain, and perceive mortal plagues in an immortal body, sighing to the heavy centuries that bring no light, no hope in their immeasurable train? Is it gone to farther regions of unequal lot, to a land where the colors of love and disgust are blended anew in the texture of the web, and the web is stained with black and bloody clouds? Is it gone to harmonies of joy, to the ardor of virtue and the wealth of truth? Is it gone to blank oblivion, the mockery of hope and virtue, and the death of God? Alas, alas, alas! Woe is me for the sad survivor, though fortune threw good, not evil, in his way, showering the roses of pleasure and the laurel of fame, whilst his brother breasted the driving snows. Alas for the sad survivor! He walks the long streets of his native city, but the peopled street is like the desolate sea. Men study his face and its lofty lines, and love the graceful tones of pride and power, rolled with rich thunder of eloquent words. In the bosom of his own land they love him and they honor him, and they think his heart leaps at the voice of their praise. But their thoughts are dark and their eyes are dim, and they cannot see that a noble nature must pine or be matched with noble things. It is ill with the living, it is well with the dead. It is better with the dead who live than it is with the living who die daily. O life, thou art a house wherein fear inhabit, and when a man poor pilgrim enters the doors, they flock unto him with icy hands. They lead him in their shivering company, and if he come to a shining room, they tell him it leads to a dungeon tower. Emerson writes another poem entitled Song. This cup of life is not so shallow that we have drained the best, that all the wine at once we swallow, and lees make all the rest. Maids of as soft a bloom shall marry as Hymen yet hath blessed, and finer forms are in the quarry than Phidias ere released. Here follows an annotated note by the editor. The damps of autumn brought increase to Emerson's symptoms. The invitations to preach which came to him were gratifying, but after each occasion his chest felt the strain. His condition was low. Consumption distinctly threatened him. At this crisis his good half-uncle, the Reverend Samuel Ripley, came to the rescue and insisted on his going south for the winter, and there remaining until his health improved. And he advanced the necessary funds and gave letters of credit. There can be little doubt that Emerson's life was saved by Mr. Ripley's kindly forethought and generosity. Waldo stayed at home until he could see his loved brother Edward, just returned from France, and then took ship for Charleston, South Carolina, on the 25th of November. For versatility of genius, see Livy de Cato the Elder, Shakespeare de Henry V, quote, hear him debate of Commonwealth affairs, end quote, etc., etc. Aubrey de Bacon, Byron de Caesar, Plutarch de Themistocles, Milton de Education, and Stuart, Fred the Third's Bottle and Cellar, Jack of all trades, good at none, what's worth doing well. Quote, no profit comes where is no pleasure taken. In brief, sir, study what you most affect. End quote. Nature notches the edge of the petal and hurls the globes in orbit. At Sea, Sunday, December 3rd, 1826. 'Tis a 9 days' wonder to me, this voyage of mine. Here I have been rolling through the weary leagues of salt water, musing much on myself and on man with some new but incoherent thinking. I revolved a thought I had somewhere found, that dangers were companions of illustrious minds, and applying it to society, which may, like individuals, by its education and fortune, emerge from its obscurity and grow illustrious, I perceived that in its progress it would overtake dangers not known to its infancy. It would embrace dangers and ennoble itself by its company. The men of this age work and play between steam engines of tremendous force amid the roaring wheels of manufactories, brave the incalculable forces of the storm, hear in the seat of its sovereignty, and fulfill in these perilous crises all the minute offices of life, as calm and unawed as they would compose themselves to sleep in the shade of a forest. Such facts assert a sovereignty in the mind that is very dear to the philanthropist. After a day or two, I found I could live as comfortably in this tent, tossed on the ocean, as if it were pitched on the mountains ashore. But it is the irresistible sentiment of the first day, whilst your philosophy is seasick, to fancy man as violating the order of nature in coming out here, where he assuredly has no business, and that in virtue of this trespass on his part, the wind has a right to his canvas, and the shark to his body. Whilst his philosophy is distempered, so is his imagination. The whole music of the sea is desolate and monitory. The wave and the cloud and the wind suggest power more than beauty to the ear and eye, but the recovery is rapid, and the terrible soon subsides into the sublime. Charleston, South Carolina, December 13th. I have for a fortnight past writ nothing. My bosom's lord sits somewhat drowsily on his throne. It is because I think not at all that I write not at all. There is to me something alarming in these periods of mentality. One day I am a doctor, and the next I am a dunce, that is, so far as relates to my own resources. An educated man who thinks for himself can, of course, at any time, by contact with a powerful mind, whether by conversation or by book, be easily wrought upon and go into action. But put away these foreign impulses, and the mind will be treacherous to its alleged immortality, inasmuch as suspended action, independent of the waking and sleep of the body, assaults the notion of spiritual life. The true account of the scarecrow is this. At sea, a fortnight elapses in which I always remember myself to have been in times past a channel through which flowed bright and lofty thought. But I find in me no disposition, no power to recreate for myself the same brilliant entertainment. I come to land, and the weary days succeed each other, as on the desolate sea. But this coveted power does not return, and every attempt to force the soul is heavily baffled. Now suppose it should never return. The causes are concealed, the sun and the moon are hidden, which affect the ebbs and flowings of the intellectual tides. They are determined by something out of me and higher than me. If the virtue that is gone out of me be withheld, I have parted with what in life was best, and eternity will lose its dread attractions. Eternity is only desirable when regarded as the career of an inquisitive mind. It would be a disappointment, a prolonged sorrow to him who mourned the loss of the sense which only could unlock its treasures. Yet during the days of this eclipse, the notice of the loss of light sometimes rises into apprehension, lest it might not return. This is our boasted human dignity and majesty and so forth. We are such bubbles that when we mount, we see not how, and when we grow great, we cannot commend ourselves. Charleston, South Carolina, December 16th. It is an old remark that there are no discoveries in morals. It is the leading object of our existence to form moral character, and the laws of morals are therefore written on the heart in luminous and ineffaceable characters. But there are problems of moral science, questions no easy solution, and it would be the grossest error to suppose that from the scanty lights of nature the young and ignorant were equally competent to decide them with the experienced moralist. It cannot be. All men are equal on this point, precisely in the sense in which we say in general all men are born free and equal. They all have the same kind of moral science in different degrees, and in each sufficient for his wants. The little child refuses to tell a lie with the same confidence and the rectitude of his refusal that the archangel feels when he persists in his allegiance to the Most High and defies the tempter. But the child can give no reason for his perception, nor see one step beyond of its harmony with nature. But there are discoveries in morals. One, in the case of every individual who loves to search the sources of action, the manner in which God has connected and fortified us by the graduated forces of the passions. Tut, tell me he makes no discoveries from the time he first blushed to the hour when he analyzed shame, and, 2, there are discoveries made in morals from age to age. The silent progress of human refinement does from time to time disclose more and more insight of the moral frame of man. Understand now, morals do not change, but the science of morals does advance. Men discover truths and relations of which they were before ignorant. Therefore, there are discoveries in morals. It is under this persuasion that we think it a matter of importance to adapt the exercises of public worship to the changing exigencies of society. If ethics were an immovable science, the primeval altar of the Jews might serve as the model of our holy place. We see that we are standing on a higher stage, that we are instructed by a better philosophy, whose greater principles explain to us the design, whilst they comprehend themselves the petty provisions of the less. We leave the ritual, the offering, and the altar of Moses. We cast off the superstitions that were the swaddling clothes of Christianity, the altercations of novices, the ambition that created a hierarchy, the images and the confessional, and would accommodate the instructions of the church to the wants of worshippers. We already descry the broader light blazing before us when we shall have emerged from the porches of the temple and stand in the temple itself. Then the champion of the cross will be able to turn from this ungrateful task in which ages have so unprofitably elapsed, of stripping off the manifold coats under which prejudice and falsehood had concealed the truth, and come at last to the dear and lofty employment of pointing out the secret but affecting passages in the history of the soul. It has been ever a favorite topic of the pulpit to warn men against the great vice of every day, assuming the show of godliness when their hearts are strangers to its power. No man in the world but pretends to a more perfect virtue than he possesses, and to denounce against this most prevalent sin the future vengeance of heaven. I am inclined to consider this a very imperfect statement, as so falling very short of the power and conviction it ought to carry. Instead of denouncing a future contingent vengeance, I see that vengeance to be contemporary with the crime. Instead of a cold delineation of the discord between hypocrisy and just moral feeling, I see the attempt at disguise in every instance to fall shamefully short of its own ends. I see that its plot is wise and its hands cunning, but in all its purposes, betwixt the work and the reward, comes in upon the evildoers a dark and strong hand which turns them back with shame upon the way they came. The true statement which I would introduce is that the assumption of a show of virtue does not and cannot impose on men, and that a successful hypocrisy does not exist, and quiet natures suffer most in the apprehension of pain. Emerson speaks on strife of theologians. It has been remarked that notwithstanding the prodigious impression which theological controversies respecting the nature of Jesus Christ have made on human history, and the passions they daily excite in men's minds, the real difference between the sentiments of the disputants when rigidly analyzed is very subtle and is inconsiderable. For the Trinitarian, whilst he names the name of God, is very careful to separate the idea of God from his account of the life of Jesus Christ, but considers him only in his human nature, considers him as a man. Hence it happens well that, to whatever party names education or inclination has attached to us, we sympathize all on the same affecting views of the life and passion of our Lord. Emerson speaks on manners. Manners seem to be more closely under the influence of climate. They belong more to the body than the soul, and so come under the influence of the sun. They are accommodations of the motions of the body to moods of the mind. In Lapland, men are savage. In Norway, they are plain-spoken and use no ceremony. In England, some. In France, much. In Spain, more. In like manner, no man has traveled in the United States from north or south without observing the change and amelioration of manners. In this city, it is most observable the use of the conventions of address among the lowest classes, which are coarsely neglected by the laboring classes at the north. Two Negroes recognize each other in the street, though both in rags, and both, it may be, balancing a burden on their heads with the same graduated advances of salutation that well-bred men who are strangers to each other would use in Boston. They do not part before they have shaken hands and bid good-bye with the inclination of the head. There is a grace and perfection, too, about these courtesies, which could not be imitated by a northern laborer, where he designed to be extremely civil. Indeed, I have never seen an awkward Carolinian. Authors or books quoted or referred to in journals of 1825 and 1826. The Bible, Homer, Socrates, Plato, Demosthenes, Epicurus, Plutarch, Seneca, Juvenal, Marcus Antonius, Origen, Machiavelli, Luther, Montaigne, Bacon, Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, Alchemist, Milton, Pascal, Penzance, Dryden, Song for St. Cecilia's Day, Absalom and Achitophel, Newton, Burnet, Prideaux, Fontenelle, Leclerc, Le Sorin, Pope, Butler, Analogy, Voltaire, Johnson, Lives of the Poets, Hume, Essays, Vattel, Rousseau, Emily, Buffon, Natural History, Wharton, Essay on Pope, Burke, Speeches, Gibbon, Roman Empire, Eichhorn, Paley, Natural Theology, Mitford, History of Greece, Herder, Playfair, Dugald Stewart, Jeffrey, Mackintosh, Thomas Brown, Lectures on the Philosophy of the Human Mind, Napoleon, de Stael, Germany, Scott, Wordsworth, Excursion, Intimations of Immortality, Dion, Byron, Marino Faliero, Campbell, The Last Man. Dr. Channing, Edward Everett, Phi Beta Kappa Oration. Webster, Funeral Oration on Adams and Jefferson. Sampson Reed, Growth of the Mind. And that is the end of Emerson's journals in collection 17. And that is the end of the collection of journal entries under Journal 17. In the next video, we will of course take up the journal entries in collection 18, which begin in 1827 on January 4th, while Emerson is also still in Charleston, South Carolina. He is age 23. Thank you for listening.